bring you Killer Wise, episode 41, Gangster Style. These are the case facts against Evelyn Davis, who had her husband dispatched. Isn't trust a bitch? Makati, the Philippines, famous cultural and financial center of the country, but also made famous for the murder of one Mr. Stephen Austin Davis.
Let's go, sir.
I imagine it might sound a bit like a cliche to say that the day of Stephen's death was just like any other day, but it was. You see, Stephen, a British expatriate, was no tourist. He was no tourist in his newly adopted Makati home. Unlike visiting Europeans who unknowingly ventured down dangerous streets, he knew better. From the lower downtown shopping district, with its lineup of thousands of scooters, to the most beautifully serene, untouched jungle in the world. But this was not always. At one point in time, Stephen believed he would regret the transfer from his beloved career in Korea to the branch office in the Philippines. But after a time, the island grew on him, as well as a woman that he would make his bride and his murderer. For all intents and purposes, Stephen was here to stay. That is, until, how do they say? One fate-filled night. That's when a vehicle, driven by his adulterous wife, picked up her lover and then another accomplice en route to Stephen's downtown office to dabble in the trade of murder for hire. Under her direction, these men would surprise Stephen while he slept in his office adjacent apartment and murder him in cold blood. 5 shots would ring out. 5 shots that would begin an investigation that was completely flawed from the beginning. It had to be, because the one thing everyone knows in this portion of the globe is that the Makati police neither have the manpower nor the financial wherewithal to conduct a decent investigation of this magnitude. For this purpose, Stephen's murderers would go free for an additional 2 years, while this island nation's keystone cops gained more evidence from Stephen's mother, who flew in from Britain to show them how a proper British investigator detects. At the time of Stephen's untimely demise, he had grown to become a millionaire who loved his kids but was slowly falling out of love with his Philippine-born wife and was on the verge of asking her for a divorce, which is always a good motive for murder in these cases. See, Stephen was no ordinary British expatriate, but a rather wealthy computer geek and technology startup company that he had designed and built with his best friend and partial financing from his mother. Stephen occasionally slept in that downtown office, which was a distance from his home, where his wife stayed with their 2 children. Stephen's job kept him in the city throughout the week, but could not hold him the weekends, when he would gladly return home to his son and beautiful daughter. If the murderous bride, Evelyn Davis, believed she was getting away with killing her husband Stephen, she was sadly mistaken. Evelyn never counted on the dogged determination of Stephen's mother to bring her to justice, as well as bring Stephen's ashes and his 2 infant children back to her home in Britain where they belonged. And there is typically one theme that runs through all these Killer Wives shows. And that is most of the wives perceive that no one will miss their husbands when they are gone. But not only are they wrong, but stuck in a mindset of money of their own. Just because you see the person you promised to love, honor, and cherish for the rest of your life as worthless doesn't mean that society shares your views. And there will be friends that love these men more than their wives. And if you work with somebody that is now gone, you understand what I'm saying. Surely there will be co-workers that miss the presence of a good colleague and a mentor. Finally, there is the family of the deceased. A family who have surely warned these men away from marrying these black widow wives. Now, all of these truths meant nothing to Evelyn. So on July 17, 2002, when she had her husband Stephen Austin Davis, a 31-year-old British national, executed gangster style. At that time, Stephen was the chief technology officer at JC Software. JC Software was a local subsidiary of a Hong Kong-based corporation, Jade Cool Entertainment. Stephen was on a fast track for success and finances. Now, together with his business associate and longtime friend Michael Dunn, a Canadian citizen, Stephen resided at a two-story apartment unit at 5958 Firmina Street in Makati City. That portion of Makati City was well secured and very expensive to live in. Now, against his colleagues' better wishes, Stephen married his killer, a one Mrs. Evelyn Bohol, in Hong Kong in March of 1997, when she was only 17 years of age. Now, the only reason Stephen married her so young was that she lied about her age and used her sister's birth certificate as her very own. On that tragic night of his murder, Stephen and Michael worked until about 10 o'clock in the evening at the principal office of JC Software in Makati. At about 10:45 p.m., Stephen and his partner headed to their rented apartment. Stephen proceeded to his room, did some computer work, then went to sleep at about 11:30 p.m., which would be Stephen's last night alive. Michael, his friend, went to the airport to pick up his girlfriend, a Mrs. Jennifer Castillo, who was then arriving from Hong Kong. Michael and Jennifer returned to the apartment at 1 o'clock in the morning of July 18, 2002, where they shortly went to bed together. Now, only an hour later, at around 2 o'clock in the morning, Jennifer told Michael that someone seemed to be moving and flashing a light in the hallway outside of their bedroom. Now, Michael, suspecting that the person outside the room was Stephen and that he was just trying to play a practical joke on them, asked, "What are you doing tonight, Stephen?" Now, instead of Stephen answering back, three men, drawn handguns, suddenly burst into the room. These three individuals were later positively identified during the trial to be Arnold Adare, Alexandra Dagmani, and accused turned state witness Robin Butas. Now, Robin Butas, don't let the name fool you, was a guy, not a girl. Arnold, whose gun was aimed at Michael, asked this question: Itoba, Itoba. In English, this translates to, "Is this it? Is this it?" Meaning, was this guy Stephen? Now, Alexandra at gunpoint then grabbed Jennifer by the hand and locked her away inside Michael's bathroom. After taking Michael's keys, his wallet, and cell phone, the three men proceeded to Stephen's bedroom because they were planning to kill him. Upon seeing the then sleeping Stephen, Arnold fired 5 shots, 4 consecutive shots hitting Stephen, who was laying on his stomach, unaware that he was about to be murdered. With the killer's murder for hire mission accomplished, they rushed past Davis, who was startled once he heard the shots ring out on their way out of the apartment. Now, I imagine one of the dumbest things these killers did at this point was to leave an eyewitness alive on the escape from a murder scene. But Michael, nor his girlfriend, was the intended target. So that's why they did not kill him. Michael was the first to see Stephen's lifeless body. After checking Stephen's pulse, Michael tried and administered CPR to Stephen's chest, but by then it had been too late. He was gone. A little while later, Philippine National Police arrived at the scene, along with the ambulance to take Stephen's body to the Makati Medical Center, where he was pronounced dead on arrival. Stephen was gone. It was during this same time that Michael made numerous attempts to reach Stephen's wife by landline phone, but his efforts were all in vain. Finally, he was able to contact her through her mobile phone at around 6 o'clock in the morning, where he informed her that the killing of her husband had happened the night before. When Michael went to give Evelyn more personal face-to-face condolences at 10 o'clock in that same morning, he readily observed that she showed no signs of sadness or mourning, despite the very violent nature and circumstances surrounding the death of her husband. Now surely, if she didn't care before, she doesn't care now. Prior to going to Stephen's widow's house, Michael had placed yet another call to Stephen's mother in Britain. Michael, when he talked to his mother, recalls, and she does too, being half in a daze when the phone rang. She answered, and a voice simply said, "Stephen had an accident. He's dead. He's dead, Margaret." And the line went silent. Now that telephone call did not originate from the Foreign Office or the police. His mother never heard the news officially from anyone. They weren't even from Stephen's wife, Evelyn, with whom he had a baby boy and a young daughter. Why not? They were from her son's best friend, Michael, who'd been asleep in the next room to Stephen when he had been murdered. It was to be the beginning of a very long journey that would see Stephen's mother put herself in mortal danger, challenge the law in Britain and the Philippines, deal with the corrupt officials in Makati, hire her own investigator, be accused of abduction of her own grandchildren, and culminate in 3 trials for murder.
You're watching M&N, the Men's Channel.
That same afternoon, an autopsy performed on Stephen by the National Bureau of Investigation medical officer, who found that Stephen sustained 4 gunshot wounds at the upper left portion of his back, to include 4 bullet holes at the back of his upper left arm, just beneath his shoulder. So this was definitely an assassination, more than it was just a casual robbery gone wrong. As Makati police began investigating Stephen's death, they moved slowly at first. At first they thought the killer was someone related to his business, perhaps a co-worker, or rob a business deal gone bad. Steve and his partner had several employees. Maybe they could have did it. So once Stephen's mother, Margaret, arrived in the Philippines and met Stephen's wife at the airport, she was shocked, taken aback. Rather than commiserating with the woman who had just lost her son, Stephen's widow immediately began to ask Margaret for money. This woman was always money hungry. She grew up in poverty, and she stayed in poverty in the mind throughout the entire relationship. As the days passed, Margaret heard from friends of the couple that Evelyn often entertained many male friends at the couple's home in Angeles, where her husband now was away during the week on business in Makati. While the cat's away, the mice will play. A mother scorned and incensed now, leading up to the hours before her son's funeral, Margaret Davis confided in suspicious about Evelyn to the police. She told him Evelyn had been stealing money from her son, that the gunman had used a key to get into the house, that no one could contact Evelyn in the hours after her son's death, that she never called about his murder, and that Evelyn said the gunman had been in the house for 20 minutes when there was absolutely no way she could have known that fact. Now, undeterred, Margaret set out to prove that her daughter-in-law had hired her son's killers and that they had been paid with Stephen's own money. Over time, Margaret began to call Evelyn Evelyn. His mother professed, "I became a mother with a vengeful mission."
You're watching M&N, the Men's Channel.
Typically, when these sketchy murder cases originate stateside, police begin their investigation with the spouse and work their way out during the investigation. Why? Because they know full well that if a wife doesn't kill her husband, herself, she will surely pay some other man to do it for her if there is money to be gained from that exercise. And boy, did Stephen have money for her to gain. Beyond the properties he owned, he had a net worth of over $1 million, with an insurance policy to rival that, along with his business holdings, which would become that of his wife should he die. The police theory of a business rival turned up nothing, and didn't answer an important question. If it were a robbery or business related, why did they kill Stephen but not his co-worker? I mean, after all, his colleague was sleeping in the next room and saw the killers, the same way his girlfriend did. Margaret Davis's mother agreed she suspected her daughter-in-law's involvement and had a bad feeling about her having affairs. The police now, in Makati, they wouldn't investigate Evelyn, letting the case go cold. So Stephen's mom packed up her household and moved temporarily to the Philippines to advance the investigation herself. Never piss off the mom of a dead son. When Stephen's mom realized the police in the Philippines weren't going to help, she hired a private investigator to keep an eye on Evelyn and her very sneaky associates. Once Davis had the names and locations of these individuals as well as photographs, she and an investigator brought them to Stephen's co-workers, who in the apartment at the slaying occurred. So Stephen's co-worker, she took those photos to him and said, were these the people? The co-worker, who saw and heard the shooter, and his companions identified the men as those who had broken into the apartment, 1, 2, and 3. Margaret remembers that it was during the last few months of Stephen's life that Evelyn began acting very strangely. She often left the house alone, withheld affection and sex from Stephen, as he said, and that Stephen was suspected that she was seeing someone on the side based on those phone calls. And sure enough, Evelyn had confided in her sister about seeing a security guard named Arnold Adderay for some time. Now, Arnold turned out to be one of Stephen's very own killers. So you sent this guy there to kill your husband so you could be with him for the rest of your life. While Stephen was alive still, he realized his wife was up to something. When he took his daughter to school one day, it was then that Stephen learned that she was never enrolled in school. He was paying tuition, but she was never enrolled in school. You see, Evelyn had spent that money meant for their daughter's education on her boyfriend and herself. Stephen told his mother that Evelyn had even pawned not her ring, but his wedding ring to keep paying that particular guy. Tired of constant drama in his marriage and in his life, Stephen eventually demanded Evelyn get a job or attend college, saying he would no longer give her money. Now this, ladies and gentlemen, was probably the move of cutting her gravy train off that prompted the killer of Stephen. As his mother's investigator got solid evidence, it prompted the police to act. With evidence from the investigation, they took into custody 3 men, Arnold Adderay, Robin Butas, and Alexandra Dagami. The court found all of them guilty of killing or of related offenses. The killers faced a prison sentence except for Butas, who helped police with the investigation as a state witness. Just like stateside, people will roll on their friends if they think it will get them off. Now, one of the men was Evelyn's boyfriend, Arnold Adderay, which strengthened Margaret Davis' theory about her daughter-in-law's involvement with her son's death. She noted that Evelyn had not cried at the funeral and didn't appear surprised to learn about her husband's untimely death. Davis and her husband, Alan Stevenson, who was a stepfather, also recalled how Evelyn had encouraged him to say goodbye to their son when the last they visited prior to Stephen's death. It was as if she was saying, you better say goodbye to this guy now, because this is the last time he will be alive. While her son's shooters were in prison, Margaret Davis remained dissatisfied. She still believed Evelyn was either the mastermind behind her son's death or somehow involved. Stephen's wife's own family agreed, helping Miss Davis with her research to bring her to justice. Now, when your family wants to bring you to justice, you really got a problem. Thankfully, one of the men who broke into the apartment, Robin Butas, said he was willing to give details about what happened in exchange for leniency. According to Butas, Evelyn had not only planned the whole thing, but was also waiting in a car with the engine running as a lookout as the men rushed in to kill Stephen. He said Evelyn told them about the apartment and gave them a key. Now, we knew this because there was no breaking and entering. This new information prompted Evelyn to go into hiding, but the police found her and arrested her for the killing. So she knew she was wrong, otherwise she would have never took off. Arnold and Alexander were thus charged with murder on August 16th of 2002. A trial after then ensued. The information was later amended, charging his wife together with Robin with the crime of murder and a conspiracy along with Arnold and Alexander. They could take them all down together. Robin contended that Evelyn was responsible for persuading him, Arnold, and Alexander to perpetrate the killing of Stephen. He further stated that she and Arnold admitted to him that they were having a love affair, and he would oftentimes see them caressing and kissing each other in the living room of Stephen's house in Angeles City, while Stephen was at work in Makati. Robin also testified that at about 11 o'clock in the evening on July 17th of 2002, Evelyn woke him from his sleep and required him to join them. She said, "Come along, let's go." Robin then rode in a white car together with Arnold, Alexander, and Evelyn, who acted as a guide in proceeding towards Stephen's apartment. They didn't know where it was without her. Upon reaching Stephen's place, Evelyn gave Arnold the keys to the house and then ordered the group when to leave the car. She knew the timing was right. Upon gaining entry, the three performed all the acts of execution. After it was over, riding in the very same car, Arnold, Alexander, Robin, and Evelyn returned to Angeles City that morning as if nothing happened. Now, even as they were traveling, Evelyn warned them never to tell anybody about the incident. Robin, however, divulged the violent incident to his wife, Gina Boho Butas, who was Evelyn's sister. In essence, the material points of Robin's testimony were wholly corroborated by Gina. Now, according to Gina, Evelyn admitted that she was in love with Arnold. She added that Evelyn confided to her the plan to kill Stephen in order for Evelyn and Arnold to be free to stay together forever. So she was going to marry a guy of lesser means. In court, by way of her defense, Evelyn theorized that it was physically impossible for her to have direct material participation in the killing of Stephen, as she was absent from the scene of the crime, and she lacked the ill will to orchestrate the murder of her husband. She also contended that she was at home with her children at the time of the commission of the felony, which was a lie. The court found sufficient evidence to establish conspiracy to kill Stephen. It likewise held that treachery was adequately proven, thus showing the crime of murder. It, however, refused to recognize the aggravated circumstances of evidence of premeditation because of the insufficiency of evidence. A lot of times people get off for technicality. Concerning this court case, and the filings indicated that it is undisputed, Evelyn was married to Stephen. However, the trial court concluded that she could not be held liable for parricide, or what is known as the killing of your spouse, in view of the nullity of the marriage certificate for having been contracted at the time when Evelyn, remember, was only 17 years of age. Though she did not participate in the actual shooting of Stephen, it was sufficiently established that she traveled from Angeles City to Makati City together with the assailants. She waited for the assailants inside of the car, and she traveled back to Angeles City again with her cohorts after the commission of the felony. In 2002, a court ultimately found Evelyn guilty of conspiring with her boyfriend and two others in the slaying of Stephen Davis, her very own husband. She faced a prison sentence of 40 years without the possibility of parole. Evelyn avoided the death penalty, but received the maximum sentence given for that particular crime. Evelyn also lost one other case. During the trial, Evelyn's son stayed with her parents, and her daughter lived with Margaret Davis and her father-in-law in Britain. Davis then returned for her grandson as well. She paid Evelyn's family for the boys' travel to Britain, as well as managed her grandchildren's passports and adoption paperwork. Since she's going to jail, she's not going to need those children, nor does she actually want her children. When Evelyn's trial ended, Margaret Davis asked for a moment alone with Evelyn. She hoped to hear Evelyn's confession, but also took the opportunity to speak her mind. Davis told Evelyn her children cried for her, adding that she wasn't mad at Evelyn, but only disappointed, since she had loved her once as a daughter-in-law. She gave Evelyn drawings from her children and promised to take care of the kids. Here is a short clip of that last meeting between the two women.
For you. Your son cries for you. They want their mummy. You don't want them.
I want Jesse and Joshua, you know
don't
that.
want them.
No, you know that. I want Jesse and Joshua, you know that.
But how can you convince me of that?
Whatever happened with Stephen, I don't know. You know that, Mom. I was there with Stephen. Everything what happened with Stephen, when he's dead, I was there, and I go to the hospital when I know when someone called me, and I was crying.
It's your boyfriend. It was your boyfriend.
I don't never have a relationship with him. Even if I die now, I have a perfect life. I have beautiful Jessica and I have beautiful Joshua in my life. What other life? Stephen is the best man in my life. It is mine.
Girl, you're a stupid.
I haven't done anything wrong.
I loved you. He loved you. Your children loved you. And look what's happened.
I don't know anything with Stephen. My daddy knows what is happening tonight.
Margaret Davis' search for justice came as a substantial cost. She not only had to pay for a private investigator, but also for travel between the United Kingdom and the Philippines, legal representation, and her grandchildren's passports. Plus, she had to give gas money to the Filipino police, who had no budget. If she wanted them to question, she had to do these small things. She ended up having to mortgage her house, nearly depleting her savings. But she was a strong mother that held in there for justice. For Killer Wives, this is Charles Rivers. Thank you for joining us.